we really have to think about the way that we approach food, how we can reduce overstimulation in both the mealtime environment and also which foods that we're offering the child. And that is where we start getting into something that I call sensory profiling. And this is something that I teach all of my clients, all of the members inside of my membership, because it's a really important thing that you need to understand before you start having success with expanding your child's diet. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nourishing Autism Podcast. If you are a parent to an autistic child and you've been trying to expand their diet for a while now, and you haven't been having success, you're trying all of the typical picky eating approaches, and it just feels like nothing is working, let me fill you in that it is not you. You are not doing something wrong. It is the approach. The approach that we often see when it comes to picky eating is not tailored for children with additional sensory needs. So you heard it from me first. You are not doing anything wrong. It's the approach. Now, the approaches that I'm talking about are some of the super standard picky eating approaches, maybe like, well, they'll eat when they're hungry, or, just put out a new food and they'll eventually eat it when they get hungry enough, or you can't leave the table until you take a bite, or you have to take a bite of this food before you can eat this food. So basically what that is, taking away access of a safe food and trying to get them to eat an unsafe food to motivate them to eventually get their safe food. Well, what all of these things have in common is that we are just completely blowing through the child's sensory threshold. Now, the way that I think of a sensory threshold is like a bucket. So we all have different sized buckets. I, could have a really large sensory bucket. You may have a really small sensory bucket. And throughout the day, every sensory experience that we have is us pouring a little bit of water into that bucket. So how we perceive the sensory experience also determines how much water gets poured in there, right? So you and I could be going through the same exact day, experience these same exact things, and your sensory bucket is overfilling by 9 a.m. and mine doesn't overfill at all because I have more of a sensory threshold. Now, for kids on the autism spectrum, their sensory threshold is oftentimes really, really low, or we are like pouring the water that we're pouring in, we are just pouring it in by like the gallon. So they often start to feel overstimulated pretty quickly. Now, when we are eating, food is incredibly overstimulating. It is a very, very sensory rich activity or experience that we get as humans, and it hits all of our sensory experiences at once, all of our senses. So when a child already is overstimulated, so their sensory bucket is overfilling, and then there's this new food or they're having to try this new food, and it's all these senses that they never experienced before, they're quickly into sensory overstimulation. So we really have to think about the way that we approach food, how we can reduce overstimulation in both the mealtime environment and also which foods that we're offering the child. And that is where we start getting into something that I call sensory profiling. And this is something that I teach all of my clients, all of the members inside of my membership, because it's a really important thing that you need to understand before you start having success with expanding your child's diet. So sensory profiling is basically digging into your child's sensory preferences around food. So we take a hard look at their diet, we dig deep, we figure out what are their sensory needs, what are they looking for, what are they avoiding, what is manageable for them, what is not manageable, figuring out all of the different areas, because there's a lot of different pieces when it comes to our sensory system on how they're going to perceive that food. It could be the color, it could be the texture, the temperature, the shape, the noise that it makes when you eat it. So there's so much that goes into that. Now, when we start to dig deep into that and we can start to understand where your child is coming from, then we can start to make really informed decisions on which foods to offer them. And this is the first step of successfully expanding your child's diet. If we can't offer them the right foods, we are not going to have success, even if we're taking a really sensory-oriented approach on how to expand their diet, because that's another part of the process. So I like to break it down in 3 different areas. So first we analyze, we figure out what are my child's needs? What are they missing? Next, I teach you how to expand from there based on what we learned in that first step. And then in step 3, I teach you how to expand. Like, how are we going to take this food, this list of foods that we've created, and how are we going to introduce it to your child in a way that's not going to put them into overstimulation? So some kids have some super straightforward food preferences, like maybe your child really likes beige and crunchy foods. Now it can be that simple, but we can dig in so much more and get so much more clear on what they prefer. Now, for some kids, it could be all over the place. Like they might have a really subtle pattern or seemingly no pattern at all in the foods that they like. Sometimes it really is helpful to have a second set of eyes from an expert to see some of the trends on what your child prefers. Now, some kids might be looking for sensory input from food because food, again, is very sensory rich. Eating is sensory rich. Some kids might be trying to avoid every sensory experience that they can from food, and that can really drive their diet. Some kids can also be somewhere in the middle. They might be sensory seeking in some areas, and they might be sensory avoiding in some other areas. So, if you've ever broken down your child's diet before, or if you've ever tried to understand it, it can feel really overwhelming trying to do it on your own because there are so many different factors. And so it's hard to be able to say, okay, what are the important factors that I need to understand to break down my child's diet? What trends am I actually seeing? And how do I move forward from here? So if that's been you, or maybe you haven't even, looked deeper into their sensory profile quite yet, this might be a completely new concept to you. And in that case, I'm really excited because I have a free 5-day workshop coming up to teach you exactly how to do this. So each day in the workshop, I send you a video and a quick worksheet for you to complete so that you can get started on breaking this down in my proven way. So I have worksheets and step-by-step tutorials on how to do this so that you can come out of this with a great understanding of what your child's sensory needs are around food, what their nutrition gaps are, because that's another really important piece, and how you're going to move forward from here. So I'm really excited. I've actually never offered anything like this before. All of this information has only ever existed inside of my membership. And now I am sharing it for free to the public. So if you want to hop in on this, I would love for you to sign up. You can join a few different ways. If you're listening to this podcast, I've linked it for you below where you can click the link. You can also DM me on Instagram at Autism Dietitian. Just DM me the word workshop and it'll automatically send you the link to sign up. You can also head over to nourishingautism.co/workshop where you'll be able to sign up in literally just one click. And then starting on March 18th, I will send you all of the information that you need in order to do this. Again, this is the first step. If you are wanting to expand your child's diet, you have to understand this approach. This is going to help you game plan to make it easier when you do start introducing foods. You are going to be super clear on which foods are going to be the most successful food for your child. You are going to be super clear on which foods are going to be the most successful for your child so that when we start introducing them, it's going to be as easy and straightforward as possible. This is also really great because your kid is going to realize that we are working with them. We are working as a team, and we want to set them up for confidence and comfort. Because when we can start in a place for them that feels comfortable, it's going to feel, first of all, it's going to feel really uncomfortable expanding their diet. But when we can start in a place that feels comfortable, and we can empathize with them on where they're coming from, it changes the whole game. So I am all about both meeting a child's sensory needs and their nutritional needs to help them get the nutrients they need to thrive and grow. Because what can happen is that kids get stuck in eating only 5 to 10 different foods because that feels really comfortable from a sensory experience. Now, I'm all for respecting that. I never say that we have to take those foods out. I'm all for building on top of that. But if we're not building, we're not gaining a variety of nutrients. And that's where we get in trouble because kids start limiting the foods that they're eating, get a very limited amount of nutrients, and then we start seeing the repercussions of that could affect anybody. If you don't have the right vitamins and minerals and you feel clouded and tired and fatigued and you can't focus, that is especially hard for an autistic child. And so we want to make sure that they have the energy, that they have the focus, that they have the nutrients to feel nourished. And that's going to trickle over into all of these other areas of life, helping them feel good and thrive. And that's what I want. So again, DM me the word workshop to join in on this free 5-day workshop. You can join through the link below in the show notes, or you can go to nourishingautism.co/workshop. I am so psyched. I cannot wait. I hope to see you there. At the time that I'm recording this, we already have over 1,000 people registered for this 5-day workshop. It's going to be amazing. Not to mention that there's an important community piece of this. You actually get access to our free community inside of the workshop so that you can connect to other parents who are also working on this journey. And then you also get access to 3 live calls throughout the workshop week where I get to answer your questions and support you on this journey. I'm super stoked. Let me know if you're coming at Autism Dietitian on Instagram. I would love to know if you've signed up. And also feel free to share it if you have anyone that you think would really benefit from this, or maybe a support group that you're in, or a Facebook support group that you're in for other autism parents. I would love if you shared this so we can support even more kiddos, helping them get the nutrients they need to feel their best and thrive. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to see you next week on the next episode of Nourishing Autism. We have new episodes come out every single Wednesday. Can't wait to see you then. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Nourishing Autism. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd love to invite you to join us inside of the Nourishing Autism Collective, an empowering and supportive community for moms of kids on the autism spectrum to get nutrition and picky eating support from me and my team of autism dietitians, access my autism nutrition library, explore hundreds of kid-friendly recipes, connect with other moms on a similar journey, and learn from top autism experts like occupational therapists, speech therapists, and more. Come join us at nourishingautism.co. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with a friend and gave it a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify podcasts so I can spread the word about nutrition for autism and reach more amazing families like you. See you next time.